Have you ever believed divorce was just signing a few papers and moving on? That's the lie society tells men. The truth is, divorce is a trapdoor. One step, and you can lose your savings, your home, even your children. In this video, I'll reveal the 10 brutal realities they don't want men to know. Stick with me because reason number 4 has destroyed men's lives in ways they never saw coming. I've made hundreds of videos, but this one may be the most important. Why? Because men underestimate divorce. They underestimate family law. They underestimate how quickly love can turn into war. This isn't about attacking women. There are amazing mothers, amazing wives out there. But when it comes to the system, when it comes to the way laws and incentives are structured, men need to know the battlefield they're stepping onto. Divorce is not just emotional. It is financial. It is legal. It is spiritual. And if you go in blind, you won't come out the same man. So today, let's start with the first 3 truths. Reason 1. You don't really know someone until divorce. When you date, you see the highlights. When you marry, you see the daily habits. But when you divorce, you see their DNA. That's when the mask comes off. That's when the survival instincts, the lawyers, and the custody battles reveal a person's true nature. Think about it this way. Marriage is like buying a brand new car. At first, it shines. It smells new. You feel lucky to have it. But once the engine overheats, once the tires blow out, once the insurance fights begin, that's when you discover what you really bought. I've seen men shocked when the sweetest woman they knew suddenly became a ruthless opponent in court. Not because she was evil, but because the system rewarded her for fighting dirty. If you think you know your partner completely, wait until divorce. That's when you'll find out who they really are. If you've ever seen someone change the moment a relationship ended, drop a comment saying, "I've seen it." You'll realize you're not alone. Reason 2. If you marry on her terms, you'll divorce on her terms. Here's the hard truth. Family law, in most countries, tilts toward women. Custody, support, property division statistics show men often walk away with less access to their kids and fewer financial resources. So what does that mean? It means you cannot enter marriage blindly. If you marry on her terms when she is the center of your life, when every decision revolves around her dreams, you will divorce on her terms too. And those terms rarely favor you. Imagine building a house on rented land. No matter how strong the walls, the landowner can kick you out at any time. That's what marriage feels like if you don't set the foundation yourself. The law gives her the land. You just built the house. And when divorce comes, you may find yourself locked outside, watching someone else live in the place you paid for. This is why mentors always say, never make a woman the focus of your life. She should be a complement, not the core. If she is the sun and you are just a planet orbiting her, don't be surprised when the orbit collapses and you get burned. Reason 3. Living together reveals the truth before it's too late. Most men don't realize how little they know someone until they live under the same roof. You might date for 2 years, thinking she's the one, but move in together for 6 months and suddenly, you notice the red flags. How does she handle money? Does she respect your boundaries? Can you argue without it turning into a war? Marriage and kids don't fix these problems. They amplify them. It's like having a crack in your car windshield. Small at first, you ignore it. But once pressure builds one bump on the road, one storm, one cold night, the crack spreads across the entire glass. I made this mistake myself. I rushed into marriage without truly testing compatibility in day-to-day life. And it cost me years, money, and peace of mind. I've coached men who ignored the warning signs, canceled engagements, constant fights, therapy sessions before the wedding, and they still went through with it. Guess what? Every single one of those marriages ended badly. Your intuition is a gift. If the red flags are there, don't ignore them. Don't think love will fix it. It won't. If you've ever ignored a red flag and paid the price, type "lesson learned" in the comments. Your story might save another man's future. So those are the first 3 truths. Number 1. You don't truly know someone until divorce exposes their DNA. Number 2. If you marry on her terms, you'll divorce on her terms. Number 3. Living together reveals more than years of dating ever will. These truths may feel heavy, but they are the foundation. In part 2, we'll go deeper. We'll talk about custody battles, financial traps, and the one reality reason number 4 that has single-handedly destroyed more men than anything else. So stay tuned. Reason 4. Custody battles are designed to break you. This is the one truth that has destroyed countless men. The custody system, in theory, the courts say they act in the best interest of the child. But in practice, the numbers don't lie. In most cases, the mother ends up with primary custody. For fathers, that often means weekends, maybe a dinner during the week, and in some cases, supervised visits if accusations are thrown around. Imagine this. You love your child, you raise them, you read bedtime stories, you change diapers, but after a divorce, you are suddenly downgraded to a visitor in your own kid's life. That's why shared custody is non-negotiable. Without it, you lose not just time but influence. You lose the ability to shape your child's values, their future, and their memories of you. It's like planting a tree for years, watering it, nurturing it, and then being told you can only look at it through a fence twice a month. Some men give up. They think the fight isn't worth it. But listen carefully. If you love your child, you must fight for shared custody. Because once you give that up, the law won't hand it back to you. If you agree that kids need both parents, drop a comment saying, shared custody matters. Reason 5. Don't leave the house until there's an agreement. One of the biggest mistakes men make is moving out of the family home too soon. You might think, I'll leave to reduce the conflict. I'll give her space. I'll protect the kids from fights. It sounds noble, but legally it's suicide. The moment you leave, the court often sees her as the primary caregiver. She has the home. She has the kids. And you become the outsider fighting to get time back. Stay in the home until there's a signed separation agreement. Period. Yes. It will be uncomfortable. Yes. Tensions may rise. But your presence matters. Every night you tuck your child into bed. Every school morning, you share breakfast. It counts. It proves you are an equal parent, not a visitor. Think of it like a chess game. The moment you abandon the board, you lose your pieces. Staying in the home keeps you in the game. Now, this doesn't mean start screaming or fighting. You need to remain calm. Document everything. Keep records of your time with the kids. Be professional even inside your own house. Remember, in family law, perception is everything. Judges don't see the day-to-day. They see evidence, so leave a trail of evidence that shows you were there, you were responsible, you were present. If you want a simple checklist of what to document, type home in the comments. I'll make sure you get it. Reason 6. Child support and extra costs will shock you. Here's a brutal reality men rarely understand until it's too late. Child support isn't based on what kids actually need. It's based on government tables tied to your income. So if before divorce you were splitting $500 a month in groceries, diapers, and activities, don't expect the court to care. They'll plug your salary into a chart, and suddenly, you might be ordered to pay $2. $0 or $2. $500 a month. It doesn't matter what the child really costs. It doesn't matter what you were paying before. The table decides, and then come the extra expenses. In many countries, they're called Section 7 expenses. That means summer camps, extracurriculars, sports programs, music lesson. She can sign them up without your agreement, and you're still on the hook for half the bill. Imagine this. She enrolls your kid in a private soccer academy for $4. Ling. You think it's unnecessary, but too bad you still owe $2. Ling. This is how men go broke. Not because they don't want to support their children, but because the system doesn't care about fairness. It cares about formulas. So what's the lesson? Know the tables. Prepare for the worst case number. And always push for shared custody. Because with shared custody, the calculations change. Think of it like going into a boxing match. If you don't know the rules, you'll be knocked out in the first round. If you do know the rules, at least you can defend yourself. If you think child support tables should reflect real costs, Comment fairness below. So far, we've uncovered 6 truths. Number 1. You don't really know someone until divorce. Number 2. If you marry on her terms, you'll divorce on her terms. Number 3. Living together reveals the truth. Number 4. Custody battles are designed to break you fight for shared custody. Number 5. Don't leave the house until there's an agreement. Number 6. Child support and extra costs will shock you. These are not opinions. These are patterns repeated in courtrooms every single day. But we're not finished. In Part 3, we'll expose the last 4 truths, including parental alienation, the silent weapon that can poison your relationship with your kids, and the one lesson about money and time that every man must learn if he wants to survive divorce with his sanity intact. Stick around. The final truths might just save your life. Reason 7. Parental alienation is real and it's devastating. There's a weapon in divorce most men never see coming. It's called parental alienation. This is when one parent, often the custodial parent, slowly poisons the child's mind against the other. It starts with subtle comments. Who buys your clothes? Who takes you to practice? Who really takes care of you? Over time, the child begins to believe one parent does everything, and the other parent, usually the father, is unnecessary. I've seen men who were loving, present, hardworking fathers, but after years of alienation, their children looked at them like strangers. Some even repeated lies they heard at home. Dad never cared. Dad abandoned us. This isn't just painful, it's destructive. Studies show kids raised without strong father involvement face higher risks of depression, crime, and addiction. Children need both parents. But in divorce, there's little incentive for cooperation. The system rewards control, and some parents use that control to weaponize the children. What can you do? Document everything. Save texts, emails, call logs. Stay calm, even when baited. Show up consistently, with love, and with proof. Think of it like gardening. The other parent may try to salt the soil. Your job is to keep planting seeds of truth, care, and presence. So one day, your child sees the difference. If you believe every child deserves both parents, type "they need us" in the comments. Reason 8. In family law, you're guilty until proven innocent. Here's a harsh reality most men don't realize. All it takes is one accusation, one claim of abuse, violence, or misconduct, and suddenly you can be removed from your own home. You can lose access to your children overnight. No proof required. No evidence shown. Just an allegation. Now, sometimes accusations are true, but too often, they're tactical. A way to gain leverage in custody or financial negotiations. I've spoken with men who were model fathers, teachers, soldiers with top security clearance, yet one false claim, and they were reduced to supervised visits with their own kids. It's backwards. In criminal law, you're innocent until proven guilty. In family law, it often feels the opposite. That's why your behavior matters. Stay calm. Never send angry texts. Never lash out. Even when provoked, assume everything you say or do could end up in court. It's like walking through a minefield. One wrong step, and everything explodes. The only way through is discipline, patience, and documentation. If you agree men should be treated fairly in court, comment equal rights. Reason 9. Someone will demand their pound of flesh. Divorce is never clean. Someone always wants their pound of flesh. It could be money. It could be property. It could be dragging the process out for months just to watch you bleed. I've coached men who stayed in the marital home for over a year, enduring harassment every single day. I've seen others lose hundreds of thousands in forced buyouts because their ex's family manipulated the appraisal of the house. Why? Because pain loves company. When one person feels hurt, they want the other to hurt too. It's like a boxing match where the referee leaves the ring. No rules. Just two people swinging until one can't get up. You can't stop someone from wanting their pound of flesh, but you can decide how much you're willing to give and when to walk away. Remember, you can always make money again. You can never buy back time. Sometimes, Paying more than you should is still worth it if it means freedom and a chance to rebuild. If you've ever paid a price just to get peace, write peace over money below. Reason 10. Choosing the right partner saves everything. We've talked a lot about divorce, but the truth is, prevention is the ultimate strategy. Who you marry matters more than anything else. Marry the wrong person, and divorce is almost inevitable. Marry the right person, and you may never face these battles. So how do you choose wisely? Look at her history. Look at her values. Look at how she handles conflict, money, and long-term commitment. Research shows the odds of a stable marriage are much higher when she wasn't promiscuous in her youth. She began serious relationships later, not in early teenage years. She has fewer past partners and a history of commitment. It's not about judging. It's about risk. Patterns predict outcomes. Choosing a partner is like choosing a business partner. You don't invest in someone with a record of bankruptcies, shows, and broken deals. You invest in someone who has proven stability and shared values. If you marry for the wrong reasons, pressure, timing, desperation, you'll pay for it later. But if you marry from a place of clarity, values, and alignment, you give yourself a fighting chance. If you're single and want to avoid mistakes, type "choose wisely" in the comments. Let's recap the 10 truths they don't want men to know about divorce. E. You don't really know someone until divorce. R. If you marry on her terms, you'll divorce on her terms. Sen. Living together reveals the truth before it's too late. Su. Custody battles are designed to break you. Fight for shared custody. Woo. Don't leave the house until there's a signed agreement. Luke. Child support and extras will shock you. C. Parental alienation is real and devastating. Ba. In family law, you're guilty until proven innocent. Zio. Someone will demand their pound of flesh. Sure. Choosing the right partner saves everything. Divorce is one of the toughest battles a man can face. It tests your finances. It tests your patience. It tests your very identity as a father and as a man. But knowledge is power. If you know the truths, you can prepare. If you prepare, you can survive. And if you survive, you can rebuild stronger, sen, wiser, and free. So here's what I want you to do. Hit like if this video opened your eyes. Subscribe for more content that helps men navigate life with clarity and strength. Share this video with a friend, a brother, or a coworker who needs to hear it before it's too late. And drop a comment with the word that hit you hardest. Shared custody. Peace over money. Choose wisely. Because when men speak up, when we share knowledge, we save each other. Stay healthy. Stay strong. And remember, time with your children is priceless. Don't let anyone take that from you.